Bob Hope made a joke about how Johnny Carson's little sister lost her life because his family couldn't afford a real doctor. And 3 weeks later, when Bob extended his hand on The Tonight Show, Johnny looked at it like poison and refused to shake in front of 18 million viewers. May 9th, 1988, Studio One in Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was taping like it did every weeknight, but the air felt wrong, charged like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Johnny Carson walked onto that stage with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ed McMahon noticed it immediately. He'd been sitting at that desk next to Johnny for 26 years, and he knew when his friend was wearing a mask. Tonight, Johnny was performing the role of Johnny Carson, talk show host, but the man underneath was somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark and unforgiving. The guest list had Bob Hope scheduled for the second segment, the legend, the man who'd performed for troops in every war since World War II, Johnny's mentor, the man who'd personally called NBC executives in 1962 and told them to give the Nebraska kid a chance. For 26 years, Bob Hope had been untouchable on The Tonight Show. He could show up whenever he wanted, bump other guests, run long. Johnny always made room for Bob, always smiled, always treated him like royalty. Not tonight. When Ed McMahon announced Bob Hope's name, the audience erupted. He walked out in that signature golf outfit, arms spread wide, that million-dollar smile beaming, 85 years old, and still working the room like he owned it. He walked straight toward Johnny with his hand extended, expecting what he always got, the warm handshake, the embrace, the hero's welcome. Johnny's eyes dropped to Bob's hand, stayed there. 3 seconds, 4. The audience started to notice. 5 seconds, 6. Bob's smile was cracking now, confusion bleeding through. Johnny's arms stayed at his sides. His jaw tightened. A muscle twitched in his cheek. Everyone who knew him recognized that tell. Johnny Carson was about to detonate. "Have a seat, Bob," Johnny said. His voice was steady, controlled, but if you listened closely, you could hear the razor blade hidden underneath each word. Bob Hope lowered his hand slowly. He sat down on the couch, trying to laugh it off. The audience's applause died like someone had cut the power. Then silence. The kind of silence that has weight. 18 million people watching at home fell silent. Johnny stared straight ahead at the camera, his jaw tight, his hands folded on his desk, professional, in control, but everyone who knew him could see it. Johnny Carson was furious. To understand why Johnny Carson betrayed his mentor on national television, you have to go back 3 weeks to a charity event where Bob Hope said something about Johnny's dead sister that Johnny would never, ever forgive. Nobody knew that Johnny Carson owed his entire career to Bob Hope, or that Bob had been keeping score of that debt for 26 years. Every favor, every phone call, Bob was tallying it all, and he would cash in that debt in the cruelest way imaginable. 1962. Johnny Carson was drowning. The Tonight Show audition had been a disaster. The NBC executives sat in that screening room with faces like stone. "Too stiff," they said. "Not enough charisma." Johnny had flown back to New York knowing his shot was gone. Then the phone rang. It was Bob Hope's manager. Bob got on the line and said something Johnny would never forget. "Kid, I saw your audition. You've got it. They're too stupid to see it, but I see it. I'm calling NBC tomorrow. You're getting that show." And Bob kept his promise. 2 weeks later, Johnny got the call. The Tonight Show was his. Johnny never forgot that. So when Bob called asking for favors, Johnny said yes. Every time. Bob wanted to bump a scheduled guest? Done. Bob wanted an extra 10 minutes? Take 15. Bob. But what Johnny didn't know was that Bob was keeping score. In Bob's mind, Johnny wasn't a colleague who'd earned his place. He was a creation, Bob's creation, and creations don't get to say no. Johnny's wife Joanna noticed something that bothered her. Bob didn't treat Johnny like a colleague. He treated Johnny like he was still that nervous kid from Nebraska, still needing Bob's approval. "He talks to you like you work for him," Joanna said one night. "Like you're still grateful he made a phone call 26 years ago." Johnny had laughed it off. That's just Bob. But Joanna was right. The golf games where Bob always reminded Johnny who taught him to hold a club. "Remember, kid, I showed you how." The charity events where Bob showed up late and expected Johnny to rearrange the schedule. The Christmas parties, where Bob told the same stories about discovering Johnny. Without my phone call, this kid would still be hosting Who Do You Trust? The subtle digs disguised as jokes. Johnny here is doing pretty well for a Nebraska kid who couldn't get a job. The possessive language. My protege. The guy I made. Johnny swallowed it all. The condescension. The entitlement. The subtle reminders that without Bob Hope, Johnny Carson would still be hosting game shows. He swallowed it because gratitude felt like a debt that could never be fully paid. For 26 years, Johnny Carson buried his pride and played the grateful protege until the night Bob Hope crossed a line that no amount of history could excuse. April 14, 1988, the Beverly Hills Hotel, a benefit for children's hospitals. The cause was close to Johnny's heart in ways most people didn't know. His younger sister Ruth had lost her life when she was just 9 years old. Rheumatic fever, 1937. A little girl who loved to sing, who was gone before she ever got to grow up. Johnny rarely talked about Ruth publicly, but she was always there in the back of his mind. Every sick child he met reminded him of her. When the Children's Hospital Foundation asked Johnny to host their annual gala, he poured himself into it. This wasn't just another charity event. This was personal. He walked onto that stage at 8:30 that night and spoke from the heart. He talked about children fighting battles they shouldn't have to fight, about parents praying for miracles. His voice caught when he mentioned Ruth, just briefly. The room was silent. You could feel the emotion. Then it was Bob Hope's turn. America's comedian, being celebrated for his decades of charity work, 85 years old, and still commanding a stage. But within 30 seconds, Johnny knew this was different. Bob had been drinking, not stumbling, but enough that his timing was loose. His filter was gone. He started telling jokes that didn't land, rambling stories that went nowhere. Then Bob said it. He was talking about childhood illnesses, and he turned to face Johnny directly. The spotlight caught both of them. Bob grinned, thinking he was about to land a great line. You know, Carson lost his sister here when she was a kid. Couldn't afford a real doctor for her. That's what happens when you grow up poor in Nebraska. 7 words. Couldn't afford a real doctor for her. The room went silent. Not the respectful silence from Johnny's speech. The horrified silence of people who just witnessed something unforgivable. Bob kept talking, laughing, completely unaware that he'd just detonated a bomb. Johnny's face turned to stone. The mask he'd worn for 26 years cracked clean through. He stared at Bob Hope, this mentor who'd just mocked his departed sister for a cheap laugh, and everything inside Johnny Carson shattered. He walked off the stage, didn't say goodbye to anyone. He got in his car and drove home, and he didn't answer Bob Hope's phone calls for 3 weeks. May 9th, 1988. 9 o'clock in the morning, Johnny Carson walked into his office and saw Bob Hope's name on tonight's guest list, and he picked up the phone to do something he'd never done before. For 3 weeks, Johnny had ignored Bob's calls. The messages piled up. Bob's manager called. Bob's publicist called. Mutual friends called, trying to smooth things over. But Johnny didn't return a single call. He went to work every day, did his monologue, and went home. He just went silent. But now Bob was scheduled to appear, and Johnny had a decision to make. Johnny pulled out a piece of Tonight Show stationery. He sat at his desk and began to write. Bob, you gave me my career. I will never forget that phone call. You changed my life. But gratitude isn't the same as obligation. His hand moved across the paper. You taught me how to work a room, how to survive in this business. But you also taught me something you didn't intend to teach me. You taught me that loyalty works both ways, that respect must be mutual, that no favor gives you the right to treat someone as less than your equal. Johnny paused, his eyes finding the framed photo of Ruth on his bookshelf. 9 years old, forever 9. I don't owe you my dignity. Ruth was 9 years old. She loved to sing. She wanted to be a teacher. She never got the chance to grow up, and you turned her memory into a punchline because you were drinking and thought it would get a laugh. He kept writing. I can forgive a lot of things, Bob, but I can't forgive that. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because some things are sacred. I'm sorry it ended this way, but I'm not sorry I stood up for her. Johnny read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He would keep it there for the rest of his life. Then he dialed Bob's private number. Bob answered on the second ring. Johnny, finally! Listen, about that charity thing. We need to talk before tonight, Johnny said. His voice was calm, flat. Talk about what? Johnny, come on. It was just a joke. Johnny's hand gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. My sister's loss isn't a punchline, Bob. There was a pause. Then Bob's voice changed. Defensive. Oh, for crying out loud. That was 3 weeks ago. You're still upset? Johnny, you're in show business. Nothing's off limits. That's comedy. Johnny's gaze locked on Ruth's photo. I understand that some things are sacred, Bob. Family, children, people we've lost. You've gotten soft, Bob said. The condescension was back. You know why you're in this business, Johnny? Because of me. I made one phone call and changed your entire life. Don't forget that. The silence after those words was unbearable. 5 seconds, 10. Johnny could hear Bob breathing, waiting for the usual capitulation. The mask Johnny had worn fell away completely. Bob didn't see him as a colleague. Bob Hope saw Johnny Carson as a favor he'd done once. A creation he owned. The booking stays, Johnny said quietly. Come do the show tonight, Bob. But understand something. Things have changed between us. Changed how? You'll see. Johnny hung up. He stared at the photo of Ruth. He picked it up, ran his thumb across the glass. I'm sorry I let him talk about you like that, he whispered, but not anymore. Then he called his producer, Fred de Cordova, into his office. Fred. Bob Hope is coming tonight, and I'm not shaking his hand. I'm not pretending everything's fine. America needs to see who Bob Hope really is. Fred's face went pale. Johnny, this will be a scandal. I've spent 26 years protecting Bob's image. Tonight, I'm protecting my sister's memory. If you're hooked on this story and want to see what Johnny does when Bob walks onto that stage, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will shock you. 5:30 p.m. Bob Hope's limousine pulled up to NBC Studios, and he had no idea he was walking into the most humiliating night of his 85-year-old life. 5:45 p.m. Bob Hope tried to enter Johnny's dressing room like he always did, but this time, the door was locked. Bob stood in the hallway, confused. In 26 years, Johnny's dressing room had always been open to him. He knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed down the hallway. No answer. He could hear movement inside. Johnny? It's Bob. Are you there? Nothing. Just his own breathing and the distant hum of studio lights. He tried the handle again. Still locked. He turned and saw Fred de Cordova walking down the hallway. Fred, Bob said, forcing a laugh. Johnny's door is locked. It's not stuck, Bob, Fred said quietly. Johnny doesn't want to see you before the show. Bob's smile faded. Doesn't want to see me? Not tonight, Fred interrupted. Johnny was very clear. He'll see you on stage. Not before. Bob's hands were shaking. The feeling of losing control. This is about that charity thing, isn't it? Fred's eyes met his. Bob, you insulted his departed sister. You crossed a line. I don't even remember saying that, Bob said. He's being ridiculous, is he? Fred's voice was sharp. Imagine someone making a joke about your family, about how they were lost. Would you think it was funny? Bob opened his mouth, then closed it. Somewhere deep down, he knew. He knew he'd screwed up. What's he going to do? Fred studied him. I don't know, Bob, but if I were you, I'd apologize. Sincerely, before that curtain goes up. Bob's pride bristled. I don't apologize for jokes. That's what comics do. He's been doing this for 26 years. You've been doing this for 65. Maybe you've forgotten that some things matter more than getting a laugh. 5:52 p.m. The 5-minute warning crackled. Bob could hear the audience filing in, the band warming up. He straightened his tie. Bob Hope, America's comedian. Johnny wouldn't embarrass him on national television. This was all theater. Everything would be fine. Bob walked toward the stage entrance, still believing he could charm his way through this. 5:58 p.m. The Tonight Show theme music started. Ed McMahon introduced Bob Hope to thunderous applause, and Johnny Carson walked out with eyes that could cut glass. Bob Hope extended his hand with that famous smile, and Johnny Carson's eyes dropped to that hand like it was something diseased. The audience was on their feet. Bob walked across that stage, arms spread wide. He reached Johnny's desk, his hand extended. Johnny's hands stayed at his sides. Bob's smile flickered. His hand hung in the air, waiting. The applause started to fade. This wasn't how it went. Johnny was just standing there, his gaze fixed on that hand with cold disgust. 3 seconds. 4. 5 seconds. 6. Bob's smile was cracking now. "Have a seat, Bob," Johnny said. Perfectly controlled. Perfectly cold. Bob lowered his hand slowly. He tried to laugh it off. He gestured to the audience like this was all part of the bit, but his eyes were searching Johnny's face for a clue. The applause died. Most of them chose silence. Bob sat down. He adjusted his jacket, put on his performance face. But you could see it. The uncertainty. Johnny settled into his chair, and the gap between them felt like a canyon. "So, Bob," Johnny began, "you've been in comedy for 65 years now." 66 in August, Bob said, "and I've still got all my hair." He waited for the laugh. It came, but it was thin. Johnny didn't smile. 66 years. You've seen comedy change. What used to be acceptable isn't always acceptable anymore. Well, Johnny, comedy's always been about pushing boundaries. Is it? Johnny leaned forward. Do you think there are lines you shouldn't cross? The audience was completely silent. This was an interrogation. Bob tried to deflect. If there are lines, I've probably crossed all of them by now. He waited for Johnny to laugh. Johnny didn't laugh. What about family? Johnny asked. What about children who've been lost? Are those fair game for a laugh? Bob's face changed. This was about that night. Johnny, if I said something that offended you, Johnny cut him off, sharp as a knife. You don't even remember, do you, Bob? The audience was holding its breath. Ed McMahon sat frozen. Nobody had ever seen Johnny Carson like this. Johnny, listen, we've known each other for 26 years. My sister's name was Ruth, Johnny said quietly. The room got even quieter. She was 9 years old when she lost her life. Rheumatic fever. 1937. I was 11. I watched my mother cry every day for 2 years. That pain never left our family, Bob. Bob's face went pale. 18 million people saw Bob Hope realize exactly what he'd done. 3 weeks ago, at a charity event for children's hospitals, you made a joke about Ruth, about how she probably was lost because my family was too poor to afford a real doctor. You laughed at your own joke, Bob. The audience gasped. Bob opened his mouth, closed it. Johnny, I had a few drinks. You wouldn't intentionally disrespect my departed sister? Johnny's voice was rising. Then what would you call it, Bob? What do you call mocking a young girl who's gone for a cheap laugh? And then Johnny Carson did the unprecedented. He stood up. Bob was still sitting there, stunned. But Johnny stood up, his jaw tight. He stared directly at the camera. We'll be right back after this. The stage manager signaled for a commercial. The audience sat in shocked silence. Bob Hope remained on that couch, his smile completely gone, and Johnny Carson walked off his own stage without looking back. Drop a comment right now. Do you think Johnny was right to humiliate Bob on live TV, or should he have handled it privately? Let me know what you would have done. The moment the cameras cut, Bob Hope exploded, and Johnny Carson kept walking. Johnny, Bob's voice echoed. He was on his feet, all charm gone. Johnny, get back here. His face was red. How dare you humiliate me on national television? But Johnny didn't stop. He walked straight through the stage door. Production assistants scattered. Bob tried to follow, but 2 security guards blocked his path. Mr. Hope, we need you to stay here. In his dressing room, Johnny locked the door and stood there, breathing hard. His hands were trembling. 26 years of swallowing, his pride had just poured out in front of 18 million people. There was a knock. Johnny, it's Ed. Johnny unlocked it. Ed slipped inside. Bob wants to talk to you, Ed said. I'm sure he does, Johnny said. He poured himself a drink. He says he wants to apologize. Johnny's gaze met Ed's. Now he wants to apologize? After I humiliated him on television? That's damage control, Ed. He didn't want to apologize 3 weeks ago. Out in the hallway, Bob was still ranting. Fred de Cordova was trying to calm him. I made one joke I barely remember. And he destroys me on television? I gave him this show, and he's given you 26 years of free publicity, Fred said quietly. Maybe the debt has been paid. Bob stared at Fred like he'd been slapped. You're taking his side? I'm telling you that you crossed a line. You mocked his departed sister, and you don't even remember. That's what's unforgivable, that it mattered so little to you. Bob's anger deflated. He glanced around at the faces watching him, and he saw it. They were on Johnny's side. He pulled out a piece of stationery and a pen. His hand shook as he wrote. When he finished, he handed it to Fred. Give this to Johnny. Fred slipped it under Johnny's door. Johnny picked it up and read, Johnny, I'm sorry. I was drinking. I didn't mean it. Please, we've been friends too long to let this end like this. Johnny read it twice. Then he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. Ed watched him. That's it then? That's it, Johnny said. His eyes found the photo of Ruth. Bob taught me a lesson tonight. Gratitude isn't the same as self-respect, and I'm done confusing the two. Johnny Carson went home that night knowing he'd burned a bridge he could never rebuild, but for the first time in 26 years, he felt like he could breathe. By the next morning, every newspaper in America had the story, and Hollywood was divided. The headlines screamed, Carson snubs Hope on live TV, late-night civil war. By noon, everyone knew. Johnny Carson had publicly refused to shake Bob Hope's hand. The phones at NBC didn't stop ringing. Some supported Johnny. Others were furious. The network executives were in crisis mode. NBC executives called Johnny into a meeting. Bob's threatening to pull out of his Christmas special if you don't apologize, one said. That's $12 million. Johnny sat across from them, unmoved. Your call, they said. Johnny didn't hesitate. Let him walk. Johnny refused to comment publicly. Reporters camped outside his home. Johnny said nothing. When people asked about Bob Hope, he simply said, I have nothing to add. But Hollywood was talking. The younger comedians rallied around Johnny. David Letterman told reporters, Johnny Carson stood up for what mattered. That takes courage, Jay Leno said. There are lines you don't cross. Family is one of them. But the old guard closed ranks around Bob. Frank Sinatra called Johnny's behavior petty and ungrateful. The debate raged. Where's the line in comedy? America was arguing about two old men and a handshake that never happened. And here's what Bob Hope didn't understand. This wasn't about one joke. This was about 26 years of being treated like a creation instead of a colleague. The joke about Ruth wasn't the cause. It was the detonator. Bob's publicist released a statement. Mr. Hope deeply regrets any offense. He has tried repeatedly to apologize privately, but those attempts have been rebuffed. The statement made Johnny appear vindictive. It worked with some people. Maybe Johnny had overreacted. But then, someone leaked the full footage from the charity event. Johnny's emotional speech about his sister. And then Bob, clearly intoxicated, making that cruel joke while Johnny's face crumbled. The footage aired on Inside Edition, and the narrative shifted. Suddenly, people understood. This was about respect, about boundaries. The Tonight Show's ratings went through the roof. Johnny gave them nothing. He did his job with the same professionalism. But people who knew him said he seemed lighter, unburdened. Behind the scenes, Bob Hope was quietly blacklisting Johnny from events. If Johnny's invited, I'm not coming. Johnny didn't care. He spent more time at home. He played tennis. He sailed his yacht. He lived his life without worrying about Bob Hope's approval. And when reporters asked if he regretted what happened, Johnny finally answered, I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Bob Hope expected an apology that never came because Johnny Carson had decided that some friendships aren't worth keeping at the cost of your dignity. 4 years later, at the 1992 Kennedy Center Honors, Bob Hope and Johnny Carson were seated 3 chairs apart, and what happened during the standing ovation revealed everything. December 6, 1992. The Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Among those being honored were Bob Hope and Johnny Carson. They hadn't spoken since May 9, 1988. 4 years of silence. The organizers knew about the feud, so they designed the seating carefully. Bob Hope on the aisle, 2 honorees between them. Then Johnny Carson. Bob Hope was 89 years old now, frail. Johnny Carson was 67, just weeks away from his final Tonight Show. The ceremony began. When it was Bob Hope's turn, The theater erupted. 90 years old, 70 years in show business. The tribute film played. Bob wipes tears from his eyes. Then it was Johnny's turn. The applause was deafening. 30 years of late-night television. The tribute film showed clips from The Tonight Show, the legacy of a man who defined an era. And then came the moment the whole theater had been waiting for. The final standing ovation. All 5 honorees were called to stand. The audience rose as one. Bob Hope stood slowly. He turned and studied the row, past the 2 people between them. To Johnny Carson. Johnny was already standing. He saw Bob studying him. Their eyes met for the first time in 4 years. Bob extended his hand. One final attempt. The cameras caught it. Johnny's eyes dropped to that hand. At Bob's aged face. At the man who'd given him his career and then spent 26 years reminding him of it. And Johnny Carson made a choice. His hand moved toward Bob's. It took everything in him. His hand was shaking. Bob saw it shake. And for a moment, Bob's face crumbled. He knew. This wasn't forgiveness. This was a funeral. Johnny stepped past the 2 honorees. He walked to Bob Hope. He took Bob's hand in his. The handshake was brief, formal. No embrace, no smile. Just 2 old men's hands clasped together while cameras flashed. But up close, where only Bob could see, Johnny's eyes told a different story. They weren't warm. They were clear and final. I see you, Bob, but we're done. Bob understood. He'd spent 4 years hoping. But staring into Johnny's eyes, Bob finally got it. Some wounds don't heal. Some words don't get taken back. Bob leaned close. I'm sorry, he whispered. Johnny's response was just as quiet. I know. Now I forgive you. Not, it's okay. Just, I know. They separated. The cameras captured what appeared to be reconciliation, but anyone observing closely could see the truth in their posture, in the space between them. It was the last time they ever touched. Bob Hope left this world in 2003 at 100 years old, and Johnny Carson sent flowers to the funeral but didn't attend. Johnny Carson left this world in 2005, and among his personal papers was the letter he'd written but never sent, addressed to Bob Hope, dated May 10, 1988. His wife Alexis found it in his desk drawer alongside photos of his sister Ruth. The letter was handwritten on Tonight Show stationery. Johnny had written it the morning after that confrontation. He'd poured his heart onto that page, then folded it and put it away. He never mailed it, just kept it as a reminder. The letter read simply, Bob, you gave me my career. I will never forget that phone call. But gratitude isn't the same as obligation. You taught me how to survive in this business. But you also taught me the lesson you didn't intend. You taught me that loyalty works both ways. That respect must be mutual. That no favor gives you the right to treat someone as less than your equal. I don't owe you my dignity. Ruth was 9 years old. She loved to sing. She wanted to be a teacher. She never got the chance to grow up. And you turned her memory into a punchline. I can forgive a lot of things, but I can't forgive that. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because some things are sacred. I'm sorry it ended this way, but I'm not sorry I stood up for her. After he left this world, Alexis shared it with a journalist writing Johnny's biography. She thought people should understand. This wasn't about ego. This was about a brother protecting his sister's memory. If Johnny's letter just hit you in the heart, share this video with someone who needs to hear that setting boundaries isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. They need to see this. The story resonated. Younger people shared the letter online. It became a touchstone for conversations about boundaries, about standing up to people in power. Johnny Carson was teaching a new generation about self-respect. Comedians started citing the incident. I learned from Johnny Carson that gratitude doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. The handshake that never happened became shorthand for setting boundaries. Bob Hope's final years were reportedly filled with regret. Friends said he'd talk about Johnny, wondering if circumstances could have been different if he'd just apologized sincerely. But Bob never said any of this publicly. His pride wouldn't allow it. Here's what Johnny Carson understood that night. You can honor someone's past help without accepting their present harm. You can be grateful while still holding them accountable. Loyalty isn't unconditional surrender. And sometimes the most loving action is to walk away from someone who refuses to see their own cruelty. One handshake denied, one boundary honored, one letter never sent but forever meaningful. Johnny Carson refused to shake Bob Hope's hand, not because he was petty. He refused because he understood a profound truth about human dignity. No matter what someone did for you yesterday, they don't get to diminish you today. No matter how legendary they are, they don't get to mock the people you loved and expect forgiveness without genuine remorse. Johnny carried that photo of Ruth in his wallet until the day he left this world. 9 years old, forever 9. And every time he studied it, he knew he'd made the right choice. Bob Hope left this world in 2003 at 100 years old, having entertained millions, earning every award. Johnny Carson left this world 2 years later, having done the same. But only one of them departed, knowing he'd protected what mattered most. Not his career, not his legacy, but his sister's memory and his own self-respect. We live in a world that tells us to be grateful, to not rock the boat. But Johnny Carson taught us a more important lesson. Sometimes the most significant people you'll ever stand up to are the ones everyone tells you to thank. Sometimes the bravest action is refusing a handshake. And sometimes love means saying no to people who've forgotten basic human decency. If this story reminded you that self-respect matters more than any favor someone once did for you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you believe Johnny was right to stand his ground. And share this with someone who needs to hear that boundaries aren't betrayal, they're dignity. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.